In a world where war never ends, one man carries the weight of a generation, survivor of the battlefield, bringing you hard truths and hot lead, reviews from the locker, and trips to the meat grinder. Now he's taking you behind enemy lines, not into combat, into truth, stories from 1st Recon Battalion. With no BS conversations. Marine, veteran, Brad Iceman Colbert. Where legends tell it like it is. This is not just a podcast, it's a mission.
Welcome to the Carry On podcast. I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman. And today we're sitting down with Dr. Gregory Moore. He is chairman of the Department of Government and professor of government, international politics and policy at Patrick Henry College. He's also a senior fellow at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. Dr. Moore isn't just a drive-by commentator. He is a scholar of international relations and security, Chinese foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, and Sino-American relations, with years of academic work and time in the arena, including connected to the U.S. Air Force Academy, Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. He has also lived the language and the region, studied Mandarin, and spent time in Beijing at places like Tsinghua and Renmin University. We have been talking a lot about Taiwan, cybersecurity, hypersonics, deterrence in our podcast, and Dr. Moore is your guide for the map and the math. He's authored major works including Neighborian International Relations, The Ethics of Foreign Policymaking, and edited North Korean Nuclear Operationality. So today we are going to get into the real questions. What's signal? What's noise? And what's the next move when rivals start acting like destiny is on their side? Dr. Moore, thank you so much and welcome to Carry On.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have written a lot about Chinese hegemony in the modern era, and I had reviewed your documentation about the 13 dashboard panels that indicate the timeline for China to reabsorb Taiwan. I'd love to start there. Can you explain a little bit more about your dashboard concept for those that might be new to it?
Sure. So I've been studying China and Taiwan for a long time. I've lived in China for about 15 years and mostly in an academic context, and got out in 2020 for actually COVID wasn't the reason. It was actually kind of feeling the pinch of a totalitarian state, just, sort of lack of academic freedom. And I didn't suffer any serious problems, but I could kind of see the writing on the wall. I said, there were certain things I couldn't write about because I was living in China, that I was worried I would get my dean in trouble or some of my Chinese family members. My wife's Chinese. She's an American citizen, but her parents are still there. I just wanted to be careful, not cause trouble for people that I cared about. So we left in 2020. COVID then sort of sealed the deal, and I just felt, well, it was a good time to get out. As I've been thinking about this issue of Taiwan, it just seemed to look more imminent to me that Xi Jinping was going to make a move. And as I tried to understand, if I was Xi Jinping, what would I be looking at? And so this metaphor of the dashboard came to mind. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I've used in the past, and I have a dashboard there of I actually presented this at the Air War College, and one of the guys there was a pilot and said, I think that's a 737. Like, okay, well, that works. If you think about an aircraft dashboard, there's lots of dials. I'm looking at the picture here. There's probably 30 dials, 40, switches. So I thought, well, if Xi Jinping's looking at a kind of dashboard, what would be the indicators that would matter to him? And so I didn't really have any number in mind. I just sort of made a list of the things that I think would be preeminent in his thinking. And so that's what those, I think you're right, 13 indicators are.
And these indicators are what you have used to paint a very detailed picture of the limitations and enablers that Xi Jinping is looking at for his timeline of reabsorption of Taiwan. So, if I understand my reading correctly, you had indicated 11 of these 13 dials favor near-term action.
Right.
My question is, which two of those 11 are doing most of the work? And if those weaken, does your forecast break?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's right. There's 13, and I use kind of opening window and closing windows of opportunity is sort of the way that I frame it. So in other words, if it's an opening window of opportunity, in other words, the longer you wait, the better it gets for you. So two of those are, PLA preparedness. Obviously, militarily, if you have more time to prepare, you're going to be better prepared. But 11 of the 13 show closing windows of opportunity. And my sort of the window that I was looking at was really sort of the end of 2027, when Xi Jinping has his next party Congress, where I think most analysts agree that he's going to go for a fourth term, and he will have to make a case. And so I believe that this is something that he would like to have done by then. So that's one of my things that I talk about in this paper. But of those 11 closing windows of opportunity, we're looking at, when I wrote this a year ago, it was 25, 26, 27, 2 to 3 year time frame. It seemed to me that the longer he waits, the worse it gets. So I'm looking at the list here. I would say one, it's hard for me to rank. I've been asked that before, which one's most important. It depends on what she thinks most important. Certainly the Taiwan people's identity is important to him. The longer he waits, the more they drift. Their identity is drifting away from the mainland. But I think that's a longer term issue. To me, one of maybe two come to my mind right now: the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, and the hypersonic advantage that China has right now. So the hypersonic question right now is, I'm sure you well know, the U.S. put most of its research and development over the past decade or two into missile defense. And,
Yes.
We up there with Israel, we have probably some of the best systems in the world. They're still not great, in my opinion, but they're better than anybody else has. So
we're
we
certainly
did
finding
not
that
put
out
as
today.
much money into hypersonic weapons. And so I think China and Russia, realizing that they were never going to catch us on missile defense in the near term, put their money into hypersonic weapons. So they are ahead of us on those and have deployed those, as I understand it. And so I think if China waits another year or two, then the U.S., two things, the U.S. will also have hypersonic weapons fielded in numbers, and also which can deter, maybe serve as a deterrent effect on China using them themselves, but also that the U.S. Might be in a position where its missile defense systems might be fast enough and good enough to actually be able to target hypersonic weapons. And we have at least one example of that in the Ukraine war, where I think it's General Pat Ryder made an announcement. I'm trying to think if that was about 2 years ago. I have a quote here. It was from 23. A Patriot battery in Ukraine reportedly shot down a Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile, and they believe, he said that yes, that was a Patriot, and it did take it down. So either the Kinzhal's performing below its reported performance parameters, or we got lucky, or the Patriot's really good enough, and maybe the Aegis SM-6 from the Navy, some of those systems might be at a stage where they're able to move fast enough. But if I was a Navy commander and I was operating an aircraft carrier or some other important ship, I would not have much confidence that my ships are safe from hypersonic weapons right now. So I think that's one of those are a couple of the things I think. The other thing is the semiconductors. As Taiwan is building more fabs overseas, we have a big one in Arizona. There's something going online in Japan and China. As more of that capacity moves overseas, then the production in Taiwan becomes less critical. Right now, it's extremely critical, and so those fabs are not completely online. The best stuff is still made in Taiwan. So if in the next year China makes a move and takes Taiwan, it can cripple the global economy because of its taking either the stuff just goes offline or China actually expropriates it and is able to then produce it itself. Maybe factory workers under duress having to perform. So if China waits a couple of years, more of that capacity is going to have been offshored. And so while that stuff is still important, it's less critical, and China doesn't have the capacity to kind of hold the world hostage. I don't know if that's even a goal, but that's certainly an advantage of that's one of the most valuable things about Taiwan is that semiconductor industry, and China would certainly love to have that given its the sanctions it is under and the prohibitions on its own importation of those sorts of things.
So based off of the time in which you authored this analysis, current events, do you still feel that invasion is likely within 1 to 3 years, or do you feel that it could move up?
Yeah, no, it could. I mean, it could move up. I nothing's changed in my analysis at all. I've seen nothing. In fact, the hot topic in the last week, in the last like 4 days, actually, is the incredible expenditure of American and Israeli munitions over there in Iran right now. And the big question of, do we have enough munitions to keep up this pace, this rate of targeting that we're doing right now? And so, of course, Ukraine is absorbing a lot of the West's capacity of missiles, and production has not really been able to keep up. I say production in the West, the U.S. and the European partners. And with Iran right now, the U.S. is really using a lot of munitions over there. And so if this continues for another week or two or a month, it could be a real, I'd have to add another 12th thing to my list here of a reason that China might find it really expeditious to move in the next 2 weeks, for example. I have no idea about weather patterns or whether this is a good time to mount, a naval operation across the Taiwan Strait. That's above my pay grade. But certainly, if the U.S. is going to get involved, flying out of Yokohama or Okinawa or wherever it might be, the U.S. would be at a big disadvantage because it's used up so much of its munitions over there in Iran. It would have a harder time being able to deal with China right now if that was something that Xi was thinking about.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think China is definitely capitalizing on our momentum with the Iran campaign, and we're leveraged fairly large with our assets being in the region and then our stockpiles, having slowly been attritted over the years. What is the single biggest factor that can override multiple dials at once? I know that the Xi Jinping government recently dismissed, I don't know how else to codify that, dismissed two senior PLA officers. Is there a black swan event out there that could override multiple dials?
I mean, there always are. It's the what Rumsfeld used to say, they call the unknown unknowns.
Yep. Love it. Love the expression.
And it's a good one, isn't it? Because there's things we know we don't know, but there's things we don't know that we don't know, and those are the things that worry us the most. I suppose one thing would be is if something happens in Taiwan where all of a sudden, Lai Ching-te just decides, let's have a referendum on independence, okay? And I don't think that's very likely. I don't think he has a mandate for that. I don't think that's what the public wants. I think the public wants kind of a quiet status quo right now. But let's say, Chen Shui-bian tried to do that back in 2000, and the president at the time, I think it was George W. Bush, said, please don't do that. That's really a bad idea. Or maybe that was, I forget, 2000. George Bush got elected in 2000. So, but anyway, the U.S. told them, don't do that. It's a bad idea. We're not interested in fighting a war with China right now. And so he backed down. Now, if Lai did something like that in the U.S., I don't know what Donald Trump would do in that case. Let's say Donald Trump says, "Oh, we don't really care. That's up to you," and then they do it, and now that could push up the timetable, and change things. On the other hand, in mainland China, if something happened where, we just saw what happened in Iran the last few weeks, people in the streets. I think the Communist Party has got a much better lock on things than the government in Tehran has had. I'm not an expert on Iran, I know a fair amount about it, but I'm not like I do China. My sense is that mainland China, um, they are brilliant in their totalitarian autocratic tendencies. And I use the word totalitarian. I'm actually writing a paper about it, so I'm very specific in using it. I'm not just throwing it around like, well, I don't like them, so they're totalitarian. I'm being very
Right.
specific about that, and I think they're very, very good at containing dissent. And so, but if somehow something happened, things got out of control, the economy collapsed, let's say, some major banks, a lot of the banks are very stressed in China. And let's say, we had this evergreen real estate thing that collapsed a year or two ago. Let's say a couple more big things, too big to fall, kind of enterprises fell, and people start rushing to the bank to get their money out, or something like that, sort of a
Yeah.
October 1929 kind of scenario. That could also, bring a big change. And I don't know which direction that would be. It could be sort of like the old movie Tail Wagging a Dog, like you've got this crisis, and so you're going to go start a war so people won't notice the crisis. Or on the other hand, it could be that the crisis is so bad that you have to pull back from any ideas of adventurism because you don't have the political or literal monetary capital to carry out something like that. And so Taiwan sees that and says, oh, well,
Yeah.
it's time to declare independence. There's a lot of things that could happen. But I think stability in this situation is probably the most likely over the next couple of years. And I think those are really critical years. I think the next 2 years.
Good. I want to circle back to something that you mentioned a moment ago. You cite Taiwanese identity
Hmm.
drifting sharply away from being Chinese. What is the actual strategic threshold where identity drift becomes, well, we must invade now?
Mm. I guess only Xi Jinping knows that, and God, I suppose. I would say I have in the paper I had a chart that's Taiwan Chengchi. It's Zhengzhi Daxue, Taiwan Chengchi University produces. I don't know how often they do this one. The one I have here goes up to 2022, and it just shows how they do a survey in Taiwan, and they ask, who are you? Are you Chinese?
Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
Taiwanese and Chinese, or are you Taiwanese? And the one that they leave out, of course, is the one that people would use most, which is Huaren, which is, it sort of means ethnically Chinese. When you say 中国人 in Taiwan, it sort of sounds like a mainland kind of definition, and so they don't say that. But the question asks about, are you Chinese? Um, but what this thing shows is that the Taiwanese response has gone from, back in 1992, 18% of the people said they were Taiwanese, and in 2022, 61% of the people said they were Taiwanese, and the people who are saying they are Chinese in 1992 is about 26%. And then in 2022, it's down to about 4% or 3%. So that is a very
Yeah.
worrisome trend. There, of course, there's a middle one, which is I'm Chinese and Taiwanese, but that's actually gone down. It was about 47% in 92, and in 22, it's 33%. So that also worries Beijing. So I guess the trajectory is wrong in every way for China. Taiwanese
Yeah.
is going up, Taiwanese and Chinese is going down, Chinese is going down. So I think more importantly is what the implications are, is that support for a referendum on independence or something like that. If we're not Chinese and we don't see ourselves as Chinese, it's much more likely that we would want to say, look, we should be a separate country. As long as we see
Yeah.
ourselves as Chinese, we hold open the door to going back to the mainland, and that door might be open. So I don't know if there's sort of a red line on that. I think it depends more on what it means politically in Taiwan. If they keep electing parties that are pro-independence, and if there is a referendum someday, that's really what Beijing will be watching, I think.
Okay. I also want to do a follow-up question
Hmm.
on TSMC. If China invades, what makes you think that TSMC is capturable rather than just denied? Like the engineers leave, the systems are sabotaged, the fabs are rendered useless.
Hmm.
I mean, because you do acknowledge uncertainty. So how does that uncertainty affect your go sooner logic?
Sure. Um, a friend of mine Jared McKinney and his co-author Peter Harrison wrote an article about 2 years ago. Jared works at the Air War College, and they published this, I think, in an Army War College journal, or it's actually kind of like a little monograph. Or no, that was the later one, but the original article was called something Broken Nest. And the idea, it's sort of a Chinese proverb, like if a fox climbs up the tree or something, the bird could kind of destroy the nest, so that the fox can get nothing. And so their suggestion was that Taiwan should announce to China, this was sort of a policy proposal, Taiwan should announce that if Beijing invades Taiwan, that they will just blow up. They will just pre-place a bunch of explosives, and that whole factory will go down. And so, in other words, it's deterring you from invading because you're not going to get the goose that lays the golden egg. You won't get the goose or the egg. And it was pretty much roundly condemned. I would say that article. A lot of people said there's no way Taiwan will ever do that. I guess the question would be, to me, more likely if that happened. I kind of doubt Taiwan would do that. Because first they're going to fight back, and they're hoping that they can win, they can prevail, and that they can get that factory up again. So you don't really want to blow it up. But I would assume that, like, the chief engineers, the directors, the people who have the know-how, the head knowledge, that those people would probably be put on planes to Los Angeles or Hawaii, or so they'd probably get them out, so that if Beijing took it over, it wouldn't be that easy to just get it up and running. It's not just some kind of turnkey project. You go in and turn the key and push the big red button, and the whole thing starts cranking out 2 nanometer, chips.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that's the bigger question. I don't know. I'm not enough of a technoid that I would know how easy that would be for Chinese engineers and scientists to just reverse engineer and figure it out, even if they had no help from Taiwan. So to me, that's kind of a known unknown for me. I'm sure there are people in Taiwan who kind of know, and probably there are people in China who are pretty in the know about that, but I don't think anybody's publishing the reality of what that would look like. I haven't seen anything. So to me, that's just something that we don't know. I really don't know what Taiwan's policy would be. I'm sure that China's policy would be they'd want to take it intact and not damage it.
Sure.
But we don't know how it would play out.
No, it's a fair answer. So I want to ask a bit about some of the administration currently on deck. You assume that U.S.-Taiwan, this bond, this defense support that we have had since the 70s strengthens even under Trump, given hawkish teams and arms trends. What's your basis for that, given Trump-era ambiguity, as we've currently seen in the last week?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's really hard to say. So 2 things I will say about that. One is the Biden administration, for all its weakness, in my opinion, it was a very weak, wishy-washy foreign policy. The Afghan withdrawal being kind of the worst example of that. Just really terrible decision to do it that way. Withdrawing's a question. I mean, the Trump administration was talking about the need to withdraw, but the way they did it, just abruptly, just leaving millions of dollars of good equipment there and everything. So it signals weakness, and yet, Joe Biden is the only U.S. president who's ever said unambiguously that the United States would defend Taiwan, because that's never been U.S. policy. The U.S. has always had this strategic ambiguity, sort of not saying yes, not saying no. They don't want to encourage Taiwan. If we say, yes, we'll be there for you, then Taiwan feels encouraged. Well, we'll just declare independence then because America's got our back. You don't really want to put them in the driver's seat to do that. And then on the other hand, you don't want to be too wishy-washy where Beijing feels like you're not committed. So you've got the strategy has been to find this kind of middle ground. And then Joe Biden just said very overtly, we will defend Taiwan. And Trump comes in and he sounds pretty non-committal. On the other hand, to me, a very important point is, I'm trying to think of his name, Strategy of Denial author, who's now the Undersecretary for Defense in the Pentagon. At my office, I have the book. I'm forgetting his name. Anyway, he's famously pro-Taiwan. He believes we should not be messing around with Ukraine. We should be putting all our eggs in the Asia Pacific basket. That's where the future is. And so he's got a huge he's got a huge voice in the Pentagon. And he was recently in Munich. Elbridge Colby is who I'm thinking about. And so he's kind of the chief voice for policy planning at the Pentagon right now. And he has been very pro-Taiwan, pushing for a stronger commitment to Taiwan. My sense is that that Donald Trump is not that excited about being so committed to Taiwan. I'm not really sure where Pete Hegseth is on that. He will do what Trump wants, but he also has to listen to guys like Colby. So I guess my thinking is that if they chose Colby, that means they know where they know his stand, and that they are okay with that, and that they agree with that. So I think there's a strong commitment to Taiwan in the Trump administration. But Trump, very famously says, I don't think it's in my interest to tell you what I would do. I think it's better not to be very clear about that. And so that's his position.
Yeah. But to your point, we have, since the Carter administration, walked this razor's edge of ambiguity, as you said, and that's the greatest word for it. And so when Trump is impartial on giving an answer, it kind of exacerbates the problem at the same time. Yeah. So, and I think sometimes this works in favor of the U.S. foreign policy interest. Sometimes it works against. I don't want to say past is prologue. We're going to wait and see what the Iran conflict looks like. But that is, in my mind anyways, a huge X factor in just determining the outcomes.
Yeah. Can I just say, I think what the point you just made is really important, because I worry strategic ambiguity. I think it had its place maybe, but I feel like now we should be more direct. And I can think of several examples of why not being direct was catastrophic. One is the famous Tokyo Press Club speech in 1950 by, was it Dulles? Yes. Who said, here's our defensive perimeter, we're pulling out of Korea. And North Korea said, oh, well, great, then we're going to invade. And so they read us as saying we're not committed to Korea or Taiwan, but actually we were. So our troops were out of Korea, they invade, now we go back in, And same thing, the other famous example, 1990, April Glaspie, U.S. ambassador, I'm trying to think, was it Kuwait or Iraq? I think she was the ambassador to Kuwait, or Iraq, I forget. But she told Saddam Hussein that the United States, does not have a policy of, it's not our policy to get into a war over Kuwait. And in fact, that wasn't true. So she's always kind of denied that she said that, but I've read enough that I think she signaled that if she didn't literally say that. Yeah. And so again, the point being, you need to be very clear in signaling and saying what your red lines are, because that's part of deterrence. You've got to deter them from making a move that you are going to fight back against. And the thing that worries me is being kind of wishy-washy and vague about this. It may not deter them very well, and they may do something that they'll be sorry for doing later, that we'll all be sorry for doing later.
Yeah, and I think China has shown in the past that they're very adept at exploiting the seams, and when we give them these seams, they capitalize on it.
You're right.
So your sacred commitment claim, saying Taiwan is existential for CCP legitimacy, if that's true, then why would Xi accept the massive risk of failure rather than just indefinite coercion?
Well, two things there. I'd say, first of all, Xi Jinping, you mentioned earlier the firing of his top general. It's actually, if you look at an organizational chart of the Central Military Commission, which is the top, we don't have quite that equivalent thing here. It's not exactly the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's the top 6 military leaders who would advise Xi, and Xi's the chairman of that. And then there's this guy, Zhang, who was just fired. And then there's 5 other generals. So Xi plus 6. Right now, there's only one of those 6 who has not been fired in the last 4 years. And that guy is the head of the discipline inspection stuff. So maybe Xi's afraid of him. I don't know. Or maybe maybe Xi's got him in his pocket, so he's not worried. The other guys have all been fired. And my read of that has always been, they're telling him stuff he doesn't want to hear. They're telling him, we can't take Taiwan, or it's not time, we're not ready, or something like that. And he doesn't want to hear that, so he's firing these. That's my own read on it. I mean, I don't know, but that
Yeah.
worries me. And so he is getting what kind of advice is he getting from his military leadership? If he's firing all the people who have the best ability to give him good counsel, that doesn't bode well for a
Yeah.
good decision. So that's one thing. I just think if he's made up his mind to do it, it sounds like he's not listening to the advice of his top leadership. The other thing again is this. I think this time frame between now and 2027, he is breaking norms by trying to run for a fourth term. So I think it's in his interest to show everybody how indispensable he is. That you need me. You can't afford, like Abraham Lincoln said, you don't change horses in the middle of a stream. In his 1864 presidential campaign, we're in a war here. You don't want to change, leadership
Yeah.
now. And so I think he wants to get Taiwan done. I really, 1997, Hong Kong returned to the mainland. 1999, Macau. The thing that remains is Taiwan, and I think Xi Jinping wants to take it and show everybody how great he is. And I think he believes he can do it. I think he thinks, I think they believe their own propaganda, how great China's military is. China's military is really untested. I mean, they haven't had a war since 1979 against Vietnam. And my read of that war is they performed pretty badly.
That was my read on it as well. I had the opportunity to visit China in '97. I went to Qingdao and I was touring as a Marine some of their naval vessels. And I'll tell you, they looked like they were rusting at the waterline. They were not well kept. And now I understand that I'm dating myself. And since then, they've had a massive industrial complex resurgence. And they are, thanks to a lot of technology that we gave them willingly or they are much better off than they were, but they don't have an NCO core. They're not battle hardened. They're not tested, as you just alluded. And they're going against a Western adversary that has pretty much been in constant conflict for the last 25 years. I feel like strategically they're at a disadvantage, but you made a good point. You're saying that Xi is surrounding himself with people that say that they're not telling the emperor he has no clothes. So is he strategically blind or is he paranoid and risk managed?
Could be a little of both. I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I was actually I lived in Qingdao for a semester in the spring of '92. So, and I remember the Chinese would all tell me, oh, remember after the U.S. defeated Japan, they're told the Communist Party defeated the Japan, which is absolutely not true. The Communist Party was hiding in caves in Yan'an while the nationalists were fighting Japan. And then the U.S. dropped the bombs and did the island hopping. But they were very warm towards the U.S., so I guess you were one of the reasons they were warm. I remember there was one of the restaurants that had a bunch of pictures of U.S. soldiers. Maybe you're in one of those pictures. The U.S.
It might very well be.
Yes, it could be. And, of course, I hope you had a tour of the Qingdao Beer Factory while you were there.
I did not do the beer factory. Of course, the Great Wall, which is obligatory when you visit that country. The section that I visited was the same one that Nixon had visited.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the National Gallery was on the visit as well.
Sure.
We looked at some of the large cities, these massive cities within a city that, they couldn't power for portions of the day because there wasn't enough electricity to run the factories and the homes. So they, kind of did a port and starboard. But my impression of that, and you far eclipse me, so forgive my ignorance, was a culture of acceptance, of warmth, of entrepreneurship, and an excitement almost institutionally for the future. I feel, and again, your expertise, not mine, I feel that has atrophied under Xi Jinping. There's, nationalism bordering on jingoism almost. And Xi is tying his personal legacy to Taiwan. And what does he do if the dashboard says not ready? Does he delay and risk domestic rivals, or does he act and then just risk catastrophe?
Yeah. Well, that's right. So let me go back to the sacred commitments question. I think it's a sacred commitment, and the question is, will it be him or somebody else? And I think he would like it to be him. and I guess there are those indicators on the dashboard. So if some of those indicators change, if they are useful, if they are actually indicators for him, then he'll have to make that decision. Maybe the risk is too great, and so only he can make that decision. But I guess my analysis of this is that so that sacred commitment thing is simply making the point that this is a commitment that they got to get it back. I mean, that's a commitment they have made, and so the question is who will it be and when? And so, like I said, I think he wants it to be him. If something happens in the next year or so where the factors change, the indicators, the dials move to the wrong direction, then he'll have to make a decision. What worries me is that he has gotten rid of his top counselors when it comes to military affairs, and I don't even see he hasn't even replaced those guys. I mean, I mean, so you've got a meeting room with 7 chairs, and so I don't know what happens when there's a meeting of the Central Military Commission. The chair at the head of the table is Xi Jinping, and then there's 3 chairs on each side, and right now there's only one guy who will come to the meeting besides Xi. Is that the way it is? I mean, I haven't heard any announcement of replacements for these people. I just heard Trump fired Kristi Noem today, and immediately there's already a replacement. And it's still going to have to go to Congress, and the Senate will have to approve it, I suppose. But but that's not happening. So I don't know. It kind of tells me, what worries me is that I think that he's deciding to move forward on this. And again, I don't have any proof. I don't have a crystal ball, but knowing what I know about China and looking at the variables, the indicators I'm looking at, there's a lot of things that point to a near-term move. Near-term being in the next year and a half. Before 2020, before the end of October 27 is when that meeting will be. And then in August of 27, they will have this meeting in Beidaihe, which is I don't know, maybe like Camp David or something like this to our president. It's a place where the leaders go to meet. It's kind of relaxed. Yeah. And that's where the politics get all worked out. So he will have to have his case. He will have to have his ducks in a row by August of 27. If Taiwan is going to be a part of his case that you should keep me for another 4 years, trust me, or another 5 years, trust me. And so that's a very short time from now, really. So
yeah, and it is short, and it's frighteningly short when you look at it from a procurement standpoint, both on our side and theirs.
Yep.
I mean, we can eliminate the roadblocks to procurement in this, drone, in this pursuit of a better drone. But there's still a lot of industrial complex that isn't there, that's not in place. I mean, we say 27 as if we've got a lot of time. We have a frighteningly short amount of time to be prepared for what I also believe is an inevitable invasion of Taiwan or a blockade. I know there's a couple of scenarios. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm really struggling with, and I was hoping you could help me, is what does a post-world look like? If China invades Taiwan, whether they are or are not successful is not important. What does the world look like after? Who is going to be on the side of the United States to help defend? Mm-hmm. Who is going to be the aggressor? And what does this do to the global economic supply chain?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say... If I think China, I would say they look at it the way Hitler looked at Europe in 1939, blitzkrieg. We go in there and like Larry the Cable Guy, we get her done. We just do it fast. Mm-hmm. And I really think that the plan, as I understand it, is you got to take Taiwan in 3 days. I mean, good luck with that. I mean, it didn't work that way for Hitler. It didn't work for Napoleon or anybody else who's tried to do this kind of thing. But I think that's the idea. You got to do it fast, because if it takes any longer than that, then the U.S. has time to bring the Marines over from Okinawa or, people coming over from other parts of the mainland U.S. And then the U.S. will debate it in Congress. Oh, this president probably won't. He probably, as we've seen this week, he'll just get it done. Yeah. He won't wait around.
Right.
But I think that they have to, I think that he realizes he needs to do it quickly, and so whether he can do it or not, nobody knows. It's 90 miles wide. It's a lot like the Normandy invasion in World War II. It's a huge logistical undertaking, and I think they're very well prepared. In my slides here, I have a picture of some of the landing craft that they have. They have these ships that can park kind of it's sort of like a Staten Island ferry or something. I mean, it'll like drop these supports into the sand, and then these long tracks will roll out. The front end will open, and these long tracks will roll out onto the beach. And then other bigger ships, the back door opens, and then other ships will pull up behind it, and these tracks will roll across into that ship, and then it will be like building a bridge from the deeper waters straight into the beach. They're pretty impressive. I mean, we didn't have anything like this in World War II, so they're working hard to get all that ready. But the question is, they just don't know what they're going to be up against. They don't know if the U.S. is involved, Japan. I mean, given what Takaichi in Japan has been saying, I think China now has to consider that Japan will be involved, and that's really bad news for them.
I agree. I definitely feel that having Japan at least verbally announce their alliance towards the United States is a good thing, at least as far
I
as
agree.
deterrence model.
Yeah.
And I can only assume that you're going to have the classic U.S. coalition partners like Australia, the United Kingdom, hopefully Germany and France as well. But can they react fast enough? Do we have the warning signals to be able to deploy what is going to require a massive naval deterrence
Right.
against
Right.
China?
Right.
I mean, you mentioned 3 days. From what I have seen, it having been a Marine for 21 years and participated in a few amphibious operations, it's no small feat.
Hmm.
And for China to transit and do something, and a great analogy, by the way, analogous to the invasion of Normandy, I question whether or not they can do it.
I agree. And I think honestly, I think the top leaders of China also question whether they can do it. Um, even if the U.S. doesn't intervene, and I expect the U.S. would intervene, but even if they don't, Taiwan, has some very good equipment. The big question for me is, will Taiwan fight? I mean, will they fight
Yes.
enough, or will they just sort of roll over and say, well, it's inevitable. There's no way we're going to win if Washington's not with us, or that's a worry that we have over here, I think. But I guess I didn't answer your question completely about the post. Let's say China does do it. Let's say they knock it out in 3 days before we can really get involved. I think what would happen is that there will be more bandwagoning among the Southeast Asian countries with China. I think they will. What will the Philippines say? Like, well, we are not technically allies with Taiwan, so I guess the Philippines might think, well, we're allies with the U.S., and so sort of like Ukraine, they're not a member of NATO, so they got invaded. If Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are members of NATO, so they've been left alone. So maybe Philippines will say, we're good. On the other hand, if the U.S. really doesn't move a finger, if this happened, if I was the Philippines, I'd be a little worried, and so maybe I'd be a little nicer to Beijing from now on, because now they've made this move. They have more territory, and it pushes them out to the edge of that first island chain now, for their naval operations to go out from there. So strategically, it gives China an advantage. On the other hand, if it goes badly and the U.S. and Taiwan are actually able to defeat China, then I think China has to kind of pull back and lick its wounds. And then the U.S., kind of like now with the Venezuela and now the Iran operations, the U.S. is looking pretty good. And the countries will probably rally to be closer to the United States, and China will look like the rogue state, frankly, that it is. And it will look more roguish, and it will hurt its global standing, and more countries will maybe not do so much business with China, that kind of thing. So I think how it plays out does matter. If it goes on for a long time, it could have an incredibly disruptive effect on the global economy, given all the goods that China produces, and that the chips in Taiwan probably go offline for this season when the war is going on. So it could have cause a huge rupture in the global economy. That seems sure, unless it's really quick, and there's no guarantee that it would be very quick, in my opinion.
I don't feel that it would be either. And there's a lot of information that I'm not privy to in the decision makers, but just looking at some of the, apples to apples, military hardware, training doctrine, esprit de corps, I think it's going to be a fairly protracted event, whether that's a blockade, an amphibious landing, an airborne assault, which is all of that to say, I think that this is going to be something that is potentially this cascade ladder where it's not going to confine itself specifically to Taiwan,
Mhm.
where there's potentially other arenas that this can play out in. And it's the thing that worries me, how it's going to take place, the mechanisms by which it's going to take place. Sure, those are academic and fun to think about, but you know, we look at the US attitudes towards the Middle East in a post 9/11 world and how much, vitriol and hatred there was towards people in that part of the world based off 9/11. I mean, what does this do to the United States if we get into a conflict defending Taiwan, a naval ship is attacked, God forbid, sunk, you're talking about thousands of US sailors
Mhm.
lost at
Yeah.
sea. What is that going to do to the Chinese US relations for the next,
Mhm.
10 to 15 years
Yeah.
after that?
Yeah. No, that's a really great question. And it seems to me that's the reality. You think about I think for me the scariest thing would be to be a Navy commander, running an aircraft carrier, or let's say a troop transport ship. Let's say we're going to bring the Marines from Okinawa over to Taiwan, and let's say you've got 1,000 Marines on a ship, and the Chinese sink it with a hypersonic weapon or a torpedo or whatever. Think about how does that play at home? I mean, I'm worried about that now with Trump's operation
Yeah.
in Iran. So far, so good. They've done a great job. But what if they sink, let's say, the Gerald Ford or the one of these giant aircraft carriers, which they said they would do. Remember, about a week or two ago, they
Yeah,
said we're going to sink these things. So their
I
talk
remember.
seems to be bigger than their ability. But what if they did? I mean, that's huge. We haven't had that happen since World War II. And
Right.
how does that play with public opinion? People will say, "What are we over there anyway for? What are we doing?" And so that's huge. It has a huge impact, and I think it's highly likely. I think it's much more likely in this Taiwan scenario than it would be in the Iran scenario, where we just have dominated the
Yeah.
sky. China's got a lot more assets, a lot more depth. It's just a lot more planes, a lot more ships. So we will take some serious losses, and how does that play in the moment back home? But also, then you're right. How does that mean it's really World War III? I think that's much more likely than it would be with this Iran scenario, where Iran doesn't have the capacity to bring
Yeah.
World War III to us. China does. China has nuclear weapons. China has the largest navy in the world now, maybe the largest army in the world. And probably the army doesn't really come into play because the ground forces, except in Taiwan, I would assume. I don't think mainland China is going to be in play here, but it'll be an air and a naval battle if there is such a thing, and it could really
Yeah.
be World War III, and that's the thing that should give everybody pause.
I yeah, everything that you just said is the same things that I have run through my head in my, what
Mm.
if scenarios when I've got time to think about such a dark forecast. So what then, knowing what we know, saying what you just said, what is the single most dangerous complacency you see in Washington's current posture
Mm.
towards Taiwan?
I have in my PowerPoint presentation, I have two pictures. I have a both of the sea, and on the left it says U.S. ROK military exercises. Team Spirit and these different South Korea, U.S. Many many military exercises. And then on the right side next to it, there's a picture of the sea with no ships at all, just the blue sky and the blue sea, and it says U.S. ROC military exercises. So in other words, we have an alliance with South Korea, and we have annual military exercises with them.
Yeah.
With Taiwan, we have we have the Taiwan Relations Act. We are committed by law to sell them equipment, military equipment to defend themselves, but we don't have an alliance. But we do have the last president who said we will defend Taiwan. We do have Elbridge Colby at the Pentagon who says we should defend Taiwan. Donald Trump has been less clear, but I believe we do have some kind of a commitment to Taiwan. but I don't see any serious interoperability going on there. I don't see any training. Are we just afraid that China's going to be mad? I mean, they're mad anyway. So who
Yeah.
cares? If this is
Yeah.
if we're committed to Taiwan, we need some serious naval, exercises. We need some air, some ground forces over there training. I mean, I was in Taiwan about let's see, about 2 years ago now, and I remember being in the airport in San Francisco, getting over there, and I saw some DoD looking guys, and I just, you know what I'm talking about. You just look at these guys, and they're like mid-20s, two single guys, very buff, Oakley sunglasses, really, good equipment, and I'm like, okay, these guys don't look like Wall Street businessmen. They don't look like
Right.
college students going there to study Chinese for the summer. What are they? And I just said, so I was working at the Air Force Academy. I said, so you guys with DoD? And they kind of looked at each other and they wouldn't tell. They were like, oh yeah, we're just going to travel around a little bit, or
Sure.
okay. So I'm assuming we have military personnel over there training and talking. I assume, and I'm guessing those two guys were part of some of that. But we're being so subtle. So why be so subtle? If we have a president like Biden who's saying we're going to do this, and I think our current president also has some level of commitment to Taiwan, why don't we just be a little bit more direct, and just send some big ships over there, and land a few B-52s and F-35s over there, and just do some exercises, and just saying, we can tell China, look, we're not trying to cause any trouble. We hope this will never be necessary, but we're just signaling. We just want you to know that this is a serious matter, and that we really don't want you to do this. And if you do it, it's going to be a very nasty situation. I don't know why we're not doing that. That's a complacency I worry about. I think people hope it's just going to go away. Whenever this scenario that I've told you about, this dashboard, and within a year and a half they might invade Taiwan. When I run it by a lot of Washington, Pentagon type of people, or three-letter agency people, they say, "Oh, it's not that imminent. Oh, China. Everybody knows China's not ready." Well, you might think China's not ready, but the question is, what does Xi Jinping think? And is he
Yeah.
getting good intel? And what does he want to do? And what are his interests? And what information is he looking at? That's the key. And so I still find myself very worried about this.
Yeah, it's a fair point. There's a lot of interoperability training we do with most of the world's military that are at least on our, list of friendly nations. Gosh knows I've participated in dozens of them. And without that training, interoperability, when conflict arises, you're not prepared to share the battle space with one another. And you're going to have command and control flush down the toilet, but you're also going to have a lot of blue on blue. There's going to be a lot of fratricide. But you said it. More importantly, it is messaging. It's signaling. It's telling China that this will come at a price. It is not going to be a walk in the park, that they have an ally in the United States and we're prepared to defend them. I scratch my head about that same thing as well. More than the other dials to me, it's the emergence of artificial intelligence, the creation of these data centers, and the center of gravity that is those chips, that production that's in Taiwan. If we are trying to win the AI race, and we have about 60% of the market share globally, we need what Taiwan has. Why is that not in and of itself justification for more force projection?
That's a good question. It could be that what the Chinese call mianzi, face. Maybe either the leaders in Washington, I don't know, do they know that? I mean, do they? I assume they must know that, right? But maybe, Donald Trump's response to that's been kind of strange. I mean, he's kind of mad about it. He's like, well, we should be number one. Why do they have the best chip fabs? And, why aren't we doing that? Let's punish them. Let's tariff them. Let's get them to move their stuff over here. And so, I mean, it's probably been kind of successful. That was already happening anyway. But why aren't we, there has been, what was it, just Microsoft or Amazon or one of the big tech companies just invested a huge amount of money into AMD, and the government just invested in Intel. We're trying to get our own stuff up to speed, and that's all good. But right now, Taiwan is it. And so that is, to me, if we were willing to go to war in the 70s or over oil in the Middle East,
Yeah. Yep.
These semiconductors, these advanced semiconductors are the oil of today. It's even more important than the oil. And then there's also the rare earths. And see, then there's another problem because China controls, what, 80 to 90% of some of these rare earths. So we've
Huge.
kind of painted ourselves into a corner here. We're really dependent on Taiwan for semiconductors, and we're really dependent on China for these rare earths. And if
Yeah.
something happens where they both go offline, our economy is all but dead. I mean, that's a scary thing, and we need some urgency. Maybe I'm a conservative. I believe in free markets, and on the other hand, maybe a little state planning is on order here because of the need to address these things. We need to be a little bit more intentional as a nation to address our semiconductor deficiencies and our rare earth deficiencies. And things are moving, but they're moving so slowly that it's not going to be fast enough if this scenario plays out like I'm afraid it might.
No, it won't be fast enough. And I think that they're looking at a calendar while we're looking at our wristwatch. And I think it's going to
Hmm.
bite us in the ass here
Yeah,
in the worst possible
yeah,
way.
I agree.
The Venezuelans do have a portion of rare earth minerals down there, but I mean, China has the planet's largest supply of it. And as technology becomes faster and faster, there's going to be more value added to it. And they can choke off a lot of the global supply, or at least to the United States, if things don't go their way. And it's a lever that I'm not comfortable with, as you said as well. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me about this subject. It's on the forefront of my mind. I think it's on the forefront of most people who are opening up the aperture towards the future.
Yeah.
Um, you have a fantastic resume. I know that you have some projects coming up. What are you working on next?
Well, actually, the last 24 hours, I was writing a little op-ed. I'm going to check my email to see if that editor responded yet. But I sent an op-ed to the journal Providence. In Washington, kind of a Christian realism foreign policy journal, and making the case for both the legality and the comportation, I guess, with just war theory. That this Trump move on Iran comports with just war theory, and also is legal, and based on the War Powers Act, based on the Constitution. And so I've just been hearing so much, in the mainstream media about, oh, it's illegal, and it's just so
Yeah.
unjust and all this stuff. Well, I tell you what would be really unjust is if we did nothing and Iran gets nuclear weapons and Washington is vaporized, turned into a sea of glass. That would really be unjust, and that's the way it was going. And so I think this president had some intestinal fortitude and did what was necessary to be done. And this, it's you don't want to have to do that, but given the lack of progress on negotiations for decades here, for a long time, and the fact that they've been saying death to America. They declared war
Yeah.
on us since 1979 when they took over our embassy, and so we've been at war with them. This is the first time we've really done a whole lot about it, and so that's one thing. I have a book I'm working on. Actually, my doctoral dissertation on China-U.S. relations, which I'm just putting the finishing touches on sounds kind of boring, but a research methods for international relations student textbook that since I teach that, it's handy to have. I could never find the textbook that I actually want, so I wrote one myself.
Yeah.
So that'll be coming out probably this summer. And then I really want to turn to the China-U.S. Topic and finish a book on that. And so, and then I have one more thing, just a little article about totalitarianism. I'm making sort of a political theory argument going back to Hannah Arendt and some newer work on, what is totalitarianism historically and what's the definition of it, and does China fit that? And it's interesting that very few people are using that word. We still just say, oh, it's an authoritarian one-party state. Yes, it is, but it actually is totalitarian if you look at how the system works. And I think having lived there for as long as I have, I see that very, very clearly. It's not Stalin of the 1930s. It's a new kind of, maybe a kindler and gentler sort of totalitarianism, but it doesn't feel very kind or gentle if you're Tibetan, Uyghur, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist. It doesn't feel so kind or gentle. But for most people, they just live their lives. So I have an article hopefully that will get published sometime in the near future. So thank you for asking about that, and appreciate the time with you.
It's been incredible. I can't thank you enough for joining the topic, and I would love to talk to you in about a year and check back in with those dials to see where they are on the needles and if they're in
I
the
hope
red.
I'm wrong, but I don't think I will be.
I don't think that you are either. So I would rather, the fortune favors the prepared, and I would rather
That's
the
right.
United States be prepared, and then we can talk about luck.
That's right. Great
Yeah.
talking to you. Thank you for some great questions.
Thank you so much. This has been the Carry On Podcast. Our discussion today has been on China and Taiwan with Dr. Moore, professor. If you are interested in more about him, we'll include links to where you can find publications of some of his works. I'm Brad Colbert, the Iceman, reminding everyone to stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.